How do you pick the turning point of the property market? And are we there yet? With so many mixed messages in the media today, I'm going to spend about 30 minutes explaining to you my thoughts of what's ahead for the property market. So at the end of today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, you'll have a better understanding of what's likely to be ahead for our property markets. I believe there's a window of opportunity before we have what I call a perfect storm of influences that are going to create strong capital growth of our property markets. Now, hey, before you say, oh, Michael's always an eternal optimist, stay with me because I hope to share with you today what locations are going to outperform moving forward and what type of properties are going to be more popular post-pandemic. And of course, I'm going to share my regular mindset message with you. So thanks for joining me for today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect, and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now, here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Are we there yet? It's amazing how many people are wondering where are we in the property cycle and how the message in the media has changed in recent times. Not that long ago, the media was telling us property prices would drop significantly. You remember some property pessimists were suggesting we could see a drop in value of 10, 20, even up to 30%. But today the common theme is the property market's going to turn later this year, early next year, and others are asking, have we reached the bottom yet? But as they say, no one's going to ring a bell when we reach the bottom. So how do you pick the turning point in the property market? That's what I want to discuss with you today. Now, my suggestions, of course, going to be don't even try and pick the bottom, because even the smartest economists, armed with all the data, that they can't do that. Instead, if you're a home buyer or a property investor, and if you've got a secure job, and if you can organise finance, now's an ideal time to purchase your next property, knowing that the downside is minimised and your upside is maximised. Now, I know some of you are thinking Michael's always a property optimist. He's always going to say it's a good time to buy property. Not true. I was saying be very selective before, and I'm still saying be very selective. But let's have a look at some of the indicators the research team at Metropole watched carefully, looking for a signal that the market's been turning. Now, first of all, we look at the economic fundamentals. Clearly, our property markets don't work in isolation, so we keep an eye on the macroeconomic factors such as the world economy and Australia's economy. Of course, Australia's experienced its first recession in almost 30 years. But that wasn't because of economic problems. It was really a health problem that locked us down, didn't it? But we're now working our way through these challenges and our economy's picking up. And our government's throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, at creating jobs, encouraging business confidence, encouraging consumer confidence. So we're probably out of the recession by now, but we won't know the official figures for some months yet. Of course, there are still headwinds. There's still challenging times ahead. There's still going to be higher unemployment than we'd like. There's still going to be some businesses going broke. But there's also no doubt going to be low inflation, low wages growth, and economic growth is going to be below long-term trends for a number of years. So I'm not suggesting it's all smooth sailing, but we look at what's going on and the trends, the economic trends, are pointing in the right direction. The other thing we look at is finance trends, recognising that the property markets are really driven by the availability of credit. You've heard me say it before, property investment's a game of finance with some houses thrown in the middle. We keep track of the Australian Bureau of Statistics data on credit growth because that's a leading indicator. In other words, it turns positive before the markets do. And with finance approvals moving in the right direction and the recent announcement of sweeping changes to remove the overly restrictive lending rules, that's going to give people access to more money, more credit than before, enabling them to borrow more and get into our property markets. But at the same time, Australians are saving more than they have for a long, long time. And this, together with historically low interest rates, is going to encourage more Australians to buy their first home, upgrade their existing home, or purchase an investment property. So we look at economic fundamentals, we look at finance fundamentals, and we look very carefully at market sentiment, because that makes a big difference as to whether people make big purchase decisions like homes, like real estate. And currently increasing consumer and business sentiment point to good times ahead for our property markets. The cloud of uncertainty caused by the coronavirus cocoon that we were forced to hide in for a while are now slowly lifting, and market sentiment and buyer confidence is improving, and that's clearly showing on the ground in our property markets. We also look at supply and demand. Now, while Australia's population growth is going to stall for a while, due to lack of immigration, there's currently, though, a lack of good quality property on the market. So while demand may diminish a bit, immigrants tend not to buy properties straight away. They tend to rent for a while before they settle down. So that's not going to affect the demand side as much. Consumer confidence will, but there's a lack of good quality. A-grade homes and investment-grade homes, they're selling quickly because we're currently seeing the normal flight to quality that happens after economic shocks. During booms, when there's a fear of missing out, people buy all sorts of properties in secondary locations, B-grade properties, C-grade properties, but at the moment there's a flight to quality. On the other hand, though, there is an oversupply of apartments in some locations, particularly in our capital cities, in the inner city, due to the lack of buyer interest from investors, overseas and local, and also there's a lack of tenant interest because we're not getting the overseas students, we're not getting the visitors, we're not getting people going to Airbnb. So we look at supply and demand, but we look at the various segments of the property market. Remember, there's not one property market in Australia. There's not one Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne property market. So all these factors that we're talking about, we drill down and look at the various fragments of the market, segments of the market. There are a number of other metrics we follow to keep an eye on these different segments of the market. We look at housing credit growth. As I said, that's a leading indicator into what's going to happen for property. We look at Google and property portal search volumes. It's been shown that interest in property as measured by real estate searches on the internet is a good forward indicator of things to come, and there are more searches active at the moment. We also look at days on market and vendor discounting. As buyers return to the property markets, we're going to actually find that properties sell quicker, so the number of days on the market is less, and sellers won't have to offer as large an incentive to sell their homes, so vendor discounting lowers as well. So these metrics turn before prices start to rise. So we're keeping a track of things to give us an indication of when our property markets are going to turn. We also look at the number of transactions, the number of properties being sold, and the number of properties being listed, because as buyers and sellers come onto the market, those who've been sitting on the sideline waiting for somebody to ring a bell, that's an indication that the property market's starting to move. And we don't pay a lot of attention to median prices. I know a lot of people do, but rather than waiting for the reported median prices, which only give us an indication of the sort of properties that have been selling as opposed to what's happening to the average property in a particular location, we look more carefully at asking prices, which are an accurate, more real-time indicator of what's happening in the market, and we then closely track eventual selling prices. And of course, we look at auction clearance rates, because, well, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney, they're a good indicator of buyer confidence. Putting all this together, we believe we're setting ourselves up for a perfect storm in property moving forward. Recently, there are three major factors that have underpinned my confidence in the property market moving forward, even though I was always confident anyway. And I believe putting all these things together is going to create a perfect storm of growth drivers for our property markets in the second half of 2021 and 22. Firstly, there was the announcement of sweeping changes to remove those overly restrictive lending rules. As I've already mentioned, this is going to give more people access to credit, enabling them to borrow more and get into property markets. Of course, the other big game changer was the budget. It was calibrated to create jobs and to promote consumer confidence. Of course, that's going to encourage buying. It's going to encourage people to invest in property too. And then more recently, the Reserve Bank stated it's going to further lower interest rates and do everything it can to support jobs, businesses and our economic recovery. Now, as I said, sure, there's going to be economic headwinds that are going to affect us, and there will be some challenges in the first quarter of 2021 where I think a number of small businesses are going to close down, and a couple of people who are hanging on to their properties are going to have some economic challenges. But in general, there's what I said a minute ago, a perfect storm leading to a period of strong property price growth in the second half of next year, 2021, and into 2022 as well. I see all these things coming together. For example, there's the federal government spending, there's federal government initiatives, their infrastructure projects. There's the state government spending and infrastructure. We're going to be in a period of historically low interest rates that's going to make borrowing as cheap as it's ever been, and that means holding on to investments or taking out a new home loan is going to be as affordable as ever. More than that, though, there's the security that interest rates are going to remain low for a number of years, and that's going to encourage people to borrow without being nervous, worrying that creeping interest rates are going to catch them out. Of course, as I said, easier credit approval is going to allow more people to borrow than before. In due course, there's going to be a return of international demand for Australian property. We are the poster child, well, after New Zealand, of how to get through COVID-19. And people see us as a stable economy, a stable political system, a secure banking system. So more and more people from Southeast Asia, and I bet there's going to be a lot from Hong Kong, are going to want to move their money out into a safe haven of Australian property. Now, there's disincentives for them to do this with various government disincentives, but that's going to push up various segments of the property market, the new market, because they can only buy new or off-the-plan properties, not established properties. And of course, in due course, there's going to be the return of immigration and students to Australia. That's going to happen as soon as the government is able to, because that's going to boost our economy. So putting all this together, thinking strategically, it means there's currently a window of opportunity between now and probably the second half of 2021 for savvy investors to really amplify their wealth position. So for many investors, those who've got a secure job, who've got financial security, it's a great time to make, I guess, counter-cyclical purchase in our three big capital cities, as all the fundamentals point to good times ahead for our property markets. Now remember, no one's going to ring a bell when the market bottoms, but in certain segments of Australia's property markets, I think we're already past the bottom and property values are slowly but steadily increasing. However, the average homeowner, the average investor won't hop back into the market until there's more certainty. They're waiting to hear that property values have increased, that auction clearance rates remain high, that the Australian economy's back on its feet, that we've beat COVID. This means those who take action and those who secure their next home or their investment property now will be purchasing in, I guess, a more uncertain market where they're more likely to have the upper hand in terms of price negotiation. They're going to compete against fewer buyers, which is actually the ideal position to be in, isn't it? So rather than try to be smart and pick the bottom of the market, which after all is only one day or 1 week or 1 month, in my mind, now's the right time for long-term investors to buy investment-grade properties. And they're going to look back in 10 years' time. They're going to look smart when they look back and say, gee, that property was a good buy. Look how much it's increased in value. In fact, there hasn't been a really good time like this to buy counter-cyclically for well over a decade. But you've got to be careful. Our property markets are going to remain fragmented. I'm not suggesting all properties are going to increase in value. In fact, far from it. So as always, but even more so now, correct property selection is going to be critical. So what is going to be the right type of property to move forward? If you've been listening to previous podcasts, if you've been reading my blogs, you know that I believe we're going to have a two-tier market where the higher-end properties, the more expensive properties in the middle and inner-ring suburbs of our capital cities are going to outperform because the people living there haven't been hurt as much by COVID as people who have got lower incomes and living in general in the outer suburbs. More than that, though, the right sort of property is going to be different because in this crazy world, COVID-19 has changed some of our preferences, how we're going to want to live. Our priorities are going to change. Some will pay more for properties with pandemic appeal. But this happens whenever there's a big hurdle like we've just gone through. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, I think it's fair to say that the pandemic has exposed some existing issues in both employment and in our housing markets, and these were, I guess, pretty easy to ignore in the past. You only have to look at the shocking situation in the aged care facilities around the country to see that many accommodation providers simply aren't set up to cope with plague-like conditions. But the same also goes for certain dwelling types. Remember those hard lockdowns of the public housing towers in Melbourne in early July? At the time, Acting Australian Chief Medical Officer Paul Kelly labelled them vertical cruise ships, and it's easy to see why. With busy lifts, shared hallways, communal facilities like laundries and garbage disposals, high-rise living in those sort of properties was the ideal breeding ground for viruses, as we've seen both in Australia and overseas. So it stands to reason that buyers of 2021 and beyond might not be as keen to live in an apartment and be breathing the same air and touching the same lift buttons as hundreds of other people. Instead, they may prefer to purchase standalone dwellings that they can barricade, they can sanitise to their heart's content in the event of another wave of virus. If you think about it, high-rise buildings were designed to organise as many people as possible in the one place, and health and hygiene weren't really a consideration. However, in times of pandemic, it's been necessary to reduce contact with everything that's used in multi-storey buildings: elevators, elevator buttons, door handle surfaces, all the above, and neighbours. After forced isolation on different floors above ground, often without a balcony or a terrace, we've all become desperately keener to live in a house, a semi, a townhouse, a villa unit, or low-rise, low-density apartments, what we used to call flats. The property could be small, but it's going to need some space. It's going to need a courtyard. It's going to need a usable balcony. It's going to need a terrace where you can have coffee in the morning. Throughout time, if you think about it, the primary function of our house has been safety. Initially, it served as a hiding place from bad weather and predatory animals. Then tall stone fortresses were built to prevent enemies from coming in. Today, people need a home that can effectively provide social isolation. Some people are going to pay a premium for this. More than escape from routine and urban chaos, the house is now going to offer a retreat from viruses, from infections. Now, I'm not saying we're going to have another pandemic, but hey, all of a sudden we're thinking it that way, aren't we? Urbanisation takes a step back as we are going to relocate now back to smaller villages and to our suburbs rather than living in the big cities and high-rise apartments. While apartments in the high-rise towers are going to be out of favour, those more spaciously built, solidly built, established apartments, as I said, those that we used to call flats, those with their own balconies and no communal facilities, located in our inner and middle ring suburbs, they're going to still suit many tenants and many first home buyers. But we're also going to be saying goodbye to one of the main trends of recent years, open plan architecture. Open plan architecture where entrances, living rooms, dining space, kitchens all unite, as occurred in many of those newly built apartment towers. In the aftermath of this pandemic, the entrance is possibly going to be better to be a bit separate, so you can leave your clothes, your shoes there, things that belong in the street there, rather than carry dirt into the living quarters. Similarly, we're going to want to be able to separate work and living space. We're all going to need a Zoom room nowadays. What this means is we're going to need more space. Sure, single people will still be happy living in a one-bedroom apartments, but once they've got a life partner, they're more likely going to require a two-bedroom apartment, where if somebody has to work at home, they're going to have a bit of extra separate space. And once they start having children, they're going to require even more space. Now, I can only imagine what a nightmare those stay-at-home orders must have been for parents with small children living in apartments without a garden, or for gym junkies forced to substitute cans of baked beans for the usual weights in their at-home workouts. As such, room for a home gym setup, space for the kids to do their karate or dance classes online, and a reasonable outdoor area for the family to get fresh air, vitamin D, they're likely going to shift from nice-to-have categories to almost non-negotiable for many owner-occupiers. And also, what's going to be more critical than ever is the importance of neighbourhood. Being locked down in a coronavirus cocoon has shown us how important our third place is, our neighbourhood is. Now, third place is a term coined by sociologist Ray Oldenburg, and it refers to the place where people spend time between their home, which is the first place, and work, which is the second place. They're locations where we exchange ideas, have a good time, and build relationships. Social distancing during COVID-19 made us experience many painful losses. Among them were these so-called third places: the restaurants, the bars, the gyms, the houses of worship, the barbershops, and the other places that we frequented that were neither work nor home. If the social distancing from coronavirus taught us anything, it taught us the importance of these neighbourhoods. If you can walk out of your home, or in a short distance or a short trip, you can go to your favourite shopping strip, order your favourite coffee, go to amenities, go to a beach, have a great park. You're going to appreciate the benefits of this third place, the importance of your neighbourhood. Now, sure, some people will move to regional Australia to have more space, but the majority of Australians are going to want to continue living in our capital cities, but in lifestyle locations, in destination locations, in locations that have got a great third place. And it's likely that in our new COVID normal world, people will love the thought that most of the things they're going to need in a good life are going to be 20 minutes away, whether it's a public transport trip, not that they ever want to do much public transport, a bike ride or a walk from home. The 20-minute neighbourhood is going to become important. Things like shopping, business services, education, community facilities, recreation, sporting facilities, and some jobs. In planning circles, this concept is called the 20-minute neighbourhood, and many inner suburbs of Australia's capital cities and part of the middle ring suburbs already meet a 20-minute neighbourhood test. The problem is many of the outer suburbs don't and are unlikely to for a long time. So people are going to appreciate the proximity to these amenities, including schools. But in the outer suburbs, for them to become 20-minute neighbourhoods is not easy. First of all, you're going to need more density, a lot more people there, and you're going to need to introduce other services there. So you're going to have a range of housing, a range of different demographics, a combination of density, more people, plus diversity, and more public transport. Not going to be as easy for the outer suburbs. By the way, tenants are also going to have a similar wish list, and savvy property investors are going to strive to cater to this. Now, we all know that location is going to do 80% of the heavy lifting of your property's performance. And in the past, certain locations, certain suburbs have outperformed others by 50 to 100%. And that's likely to happen again with regard to capital growth moving forward. And it's likely to be these livable locations that are going to be highly desired. See, the way we work and the way we live is going to change. During quarantine, most of us were forced to work from home. Of course, there are a group of people who on the first day after quarantine, they raced out to meet their colleagues and drink that office coffee. But there are also those of us who are not so keen to return to work. More attention is going to be given to the arrangement of the workplace at home, as I've already suggested. Adequate home office facilities are going to be high on the list of many property buyers' wish list. So apart from the right location, you're going to have to own the right sort of property moving forward for it to be the sort of property that's going to outperform. Now, all the previous criteria that you've heard me talk about over the last 3 years in this podcast or read in my blogs haven't changed. But also, there are now some extra requirements. I mean, anyone who was forced to squeeze their laptop next to their kids' schoolwork on the kitchen table or host a Zoom meeting in their spare room with the family washing hanging in the background, you've seen those videos, they're going to appreciate the need for a dedicated workspace in their home. Whether it's for 1 or 2 kids to learn remotely or for mum and dad to work from home without leaving home, the desk in the corner of the lounge room simply isn't going to cut it anymore. Spatial organisation is going to change. You're going to need more room to have offices really in a separate room. That's why I was actually suggesting a minute ago that I think the average consumer, the average Australian, is going to want a little bit more space in their house. Buyers will be looking for properties where they can have a separate home office with large windows, but also to be able to have blackout curtains, so all going to be able to have their Zoom meetings there. Other things buyers would be looking for post-pandemic include a spare room to house a relative in the event of another lockdown, avoid splitting up the family. But as I said, it's not just the property, it's also the location. So putting all this together, I can see that in many parts of Australia, while nobody has rung a bell yet, we have passed the bottom of the property cycle. Sure, there's going to be ups and downs and there's going to be mixed messages, but the media always gives you mixed messages at times of market change. Remember, during booms, all the messages are positive. During difficult times, all the messages in the media tend to be negative. And as the cycle moves on, we get these mixed messages, some people saying things are going to get better and others still being concerned. Having said that, I believe now is a great time to get your ducks in a row and to get set to take advantage of what's likely to be very, very strong property markets moving forward in the second half of 2021 and 22. Now, most of the bank economists have changed their mind. Most of the big economists have changed their mind and agree with what I'm saying. But again, careful property selection is important. The right finance is important. So today, more than ever, a holistic approach to your wealth creation is critical. Sure, a buyer's agent is helpful. Sure, a property strategist will be useful in putting a plan together. But in my mind, you need more than that. You need a holistic approach. And that's what my team at Metropole can do for you. We've got no properties for sale, but we've got access to every property on the market. But before we even look at properties, we put a strategic plan together for you. We help you plan to become the person you plan to become. We help putting a finance strategy together, ownership and structure strategy, and of course, having property management, renovations, development, financial planning, wealth advisory, even business advisory. We can put a holistic plan together for you to tell you what's realistic, to tell you what's possible, and to make things safer by using our many years of perspective. Now, if you're interested in taking advantage of this window of opportunity, why not give my team a call at 1300 Metropole or go to metropole.com.au, leave your details, and I'd love to be part of your wealth creation journey.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's Mindset Moment, I'd like to share with you the big difference between winners and losers. Over the years, I've had the privilege of working with some very successful property investors, business people, and entrepreneurs. And I've also met some not so successful people. And I found that in general, people fall into one of two groups: those who make excuses and those who don't. The ones who make excuses, look, they don't start that way. No one's born talented at making excuses, but over the years, they've learned to get out of things. They've learned to blame the economy, their parents, their teachers, the system, I don't know, pretty much anything they can deflect the blame on, because this gives them the excuse that they need. And then there are those people, the other group of people, who don't, or rather won't, make excuses. We all have our difficulties, and some days we feel like making excuses. But winners stop themselves. They don't make excuses. They just get the job done. Interestingly, we all have similar capabilities. Yes, we've got similar capabilities to get things done or not, or to make excuses about it or not. When you wake up in the morning, you get to choose. You get to choose which route you take. Now, I recently read this insightful quote. I think it brings it home. The difference between successful people and unsuccessful people is that smart people hate doing the same thing that unsuccessful people hate doing. But the successful people just do it anyway. Interesting. We all hate doing those things we don't like doing, but successful people do it anyway. So as you go on this journey that we call life, you're going to get the chance to back out and make excuses or not. You've got a choice. You decide. Well, I hope you got some benefit from today's show, and if you did, please tell somebody else about it, because I would like them also to get some clarity about what's going to happen to our property markets moving forward and why there is currently a window of opportunity. My intention is to make as many people as financially independent as possible by educating them, by giving them the sort of information I've just given you. Of course, you can tell the world by leaving a review on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to this. And if I read it out, as I'm about to read out a review for V. Sharmak, who left a review on Apple Podcasts, and you email me, michael@metropole.com.au, I'd love to give you one of my books as a way of saying thank you. Now, V. Sharmak left a review saying, educational and practical. By the way, it was a 5-star review, and they seem to be the only ones I get, so thank you. And he said, I've been listening to this podcast for a year now, and I've already made some big steps in property, and I can already see great improvement in my net worth. Well, boy, that's really exciting to hear. He went on to say, it's also improved my confidence, my health, and my mental health as well. Thanks, Michael, for sharing your ideas and message through this. Well, boy, does that make my day when I got a lovely review like that. I'm pleased that I'm making a difference in your life. Thanks for listening to my podcast again today. I'll be back in a couple of days. Twice a week, I'm back with the Michael Yardney podcast, or you can keep up to date with me on social media. Just look for Michael Yardney. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?